No question, Alois was violent. He died at 65 of pleural hemorrhage. Good riddance, we say, to a nasty, foul, not abstemious old man. Alois Jr, said their father, often beat the dog until he'd cringe and wet the floor. He liked whips. After the dog, he'd beat the older boy with a hippopotamus whip. Unbeatable weapon, strong, stinging, horny hide, never ripped, never gone, never fell apart, never wore out. Then Adolf got it. In later years, the younger boy favoured whips too. He liked to get a gift just like the one his father used. He'd walk around and slap his palm and his thigh with it. This is Adolf Hitler's father. He had been a customs official and even in retirement liked to be addressed as a customs officer and continued to wear the uniform, which is why, I presume, he's wearing it here. Adolf Hitler's father was called Alois, and he was born on the 7th of June 1837. His first wife was Anna Fuhrer, who was about 14 years older than he was. They separated in 1880 and she died in 1883. In the meantime, he got Franziska Matzelsberger pregnant, and on the 13th of January 1882, Alois Jr was born. Franziska was a cook at an inn and was born in 1861, making her 24 years younger than Alois. The son, Alois Jr, was initially called Alois Matzelsberger, but once his parents got married, he became legitimate and could take his father's name, Hitler. Franziska later gave birth to a daughter, Angela, and died of tuberculosis shortly after on the 10th of August 1884. The father then married his third wife, Klara, and she gave birth to 2 children who survived into adulthood, Paula in 1896 and Adolf, the future Fuhrer, on the 20th of April 1889. Here I'm going to talk about Alois Hitler Jr, the son born out of wedlock to Franziska Matzelsberger and Alois Sr. Following the father's remarriage to Klara, the 2 children moved in with his new wife and thus lived with the future Nazi leader-to-be and his sister. One of the places they lived at was here in Passau in Germany, whilst the father worked on the Austrian side of the border as a customs official. You can see the places they lived in a video I did in Passau. As can happen in these situations, the children from the first marriage did not tend to get on so well with the children from the second marriage, particularly as the mother is likely to favour her own younger children. Hitler's father was a strict disciplinarian, and it would seem that Alois, as the older son, would often take a beating because of Adolf's pranks. Adolf possibly had his mother putting in a good word for him with the father, so Alois got the blame. The 2 half-brothers did not get on. Since Alois Hitler Jr showed technical talent, the father intended to send him to a school so he could become an engineer. These hopes, however, seem to have been dropped abruptly, perhaps also due to Klara's intervention. In any case, the father was not ready to invest large sums in the education of the son. Instead, Alois was apprenticed. It's not clear when he left home, but it was probably at the time he departed from this house, which is still standing on Leonding in Austria, and you can see that in another video as well. With the termination of the apprenticeship, Alois began to get into trouble with the law. In 1900, he was sentenced to 5 months in prison for theft. In 1902, he was imprisoned for a further 8 months. This must have been a major disappointment for Alois Sr, who had worked his way up from being an impoverished farmer to that of a customs official who had the equivalent rank of captain, a good house, several real estate investments, and a very good pension. In 1905, Alois Jr. emigrated to London. He started an apprenticeship again. He found his way to Dublin, where he met 17-year-old Bridget Dowling, who was visiting the racecourse with her father. He told Bridget and her father that he was a wealthy hotel owner doing a tour of Europe, whereas in fact he was a waiter at the Shelbourne Hotel in Dublin. He eloped with her to London on the 3rd of June 1910 and lived for a while on Charing Cross Road, which was then not as expensive as it is today. The father threatened to report him for kidnapping, but Bridget persuaded him out of this, and Alois married her. The couple settled at 102 Upper Stanhope Street in Toxteth, Liverpool, and had their only child there in 1911, William Patrick Hitler. Ironically enough, the house was destroyed in what was to be the last major air raid on Liverpool on the 10th of January 1942. And here's a picture of Liverpool after it was bombed. Whilst in Liverpool, Alois attempted to run a small eatery and a boarding house. The businesses failed. The marriage was not a happy one. There were tensions at home. Alois would get drunk and regularly assaulted his wife. Just before the outbreak of war, Alois absconded, deserting his family, and went to Germany, where he had an offer of employment or business opportunity. What exactly is not clear, but appears to have had something to do with safety raises. Whether or not Bridget was supposed to join him is also not clear. In any case, Bridget Hitler refused to move to Germany with him, and that should not come as a surprise, given the way that he treated her. After the war, Bridget got a message saying that he'd been killed in action, although she later learned that this was not true. Alois Hitler remarried, thereby committing bigamy. When word got out, he was charged with bigamy in Hamburg in 1924, got a 6-month suspended sentence, which was waived possibly due to Bridget's intervention. Bridget raised her son alone and eventually divorced Alois, despite being a Catholic who was against divorce on religious grounds. At her home in Highgate in North London, she took in lodgers, although later in life she was able to profit from her notorious family and published a memoir in which she claimed that Adolf Hitler came to stay with them in Liverpool, which of course is a load of nonsense. Not that it stopped the likes of the Daily Mail and the Daily Express from running it. Here we can see a picture of her with her son once she became famous. I have not read her book, as I don't read fiction, but I'm told it's very funny. Alois Hitler Jr. had a child, Heinrich, also known as Heinz, with his second wife, Hedwig Frieda Amelie Hette Meckli. Hette is short for Hedwig. She came from Groß Neuendorf on the Oder River and was born in 1889. Alois joined the Nazi Party on the 3rd of August 1926. Membership number 41754. But he left on the 30th of September 1927. Maybe he didn't want to pay the dues. It seems as though he was financially okay until the Great Depression, but then things went downhill for him, as they did for many other people. He survived doing odd jobs until 1933-1934. In 1933, as the economy began to pick up, he opened a small eatery in Berlin. He later claimed that he opened the Berlin location in 1928, which may be true. On the 15th of September 1937, he opened a much grander business. This was the Konditorei Café Alois in Wittenbergplatz 3 in Berlin. Wittenbergplatz was the address to be at. That still is a pretty good address to be at. It was near the Kudamm and right next to the Kaufhaus des Westens, which was and is, I believe, the second largest department store in Europe. There was an article on page 5 of the Freie Stimmen on the 18th of September 1937, letting people know that the Fuhrer's half-brother had opened the cafe. Now, let's imagine that you are a streetwise Nazi and you're looking to feather your nest. It would make sense to do your drinking at the cafe, which belonged to Hitler's half-brother, and so the business flourished. Furthermore, not just the rank and file, but also high-ranking Nazi officials and ministers would frequent the cafe, and also they had the opportunity to chat undisturbed in separate, private rooms. As it was located very close to the government district, this was a convenient arrangement. Now, as far as I can tell, there had been next to no contact between the half-brothers, Alois and Adolf, since the seizure of power. However, there were phone calls on the 20th of April for Adolf's birthday. Adolf, it would seem, was embarrassed by his half-brother, although he did try to help out his half-brother's son, William Patrick, who came to Germany at the end of the 1920s and stayed with his father. I shall examine his story in a different video. It is possible that Adolf denied him permission to use his name, Hitler, on his cafe. However, it was a situation that everybody knew about. Until this time, only a few knew about Hitler's half-brother. On the 2nd of May 1938, Hitler wrote out his will. The will, of course, like all wills, was a secret. On that day, he was about to go to Rome to visit Mussolini, and maybe thought he was not coming back. Maybe he thought that Mussolini would give him a dodgy pizza, or maybe he was frightened of dying or something else, who knows. In the will, he left his possessions to the party, but expected the party to make financial arrangements to pay a number of people he names. Eva Braun, for example, was to get 1,000 marks a month for life, as were his sisters, as he put it, Angela and Paula. Angela, of course, was his half-sister. Now, in his will, he mentions that Alois was his half-brother, not his brother, note, but Alois was to get a lump sum of 60,000 marks, which was quite a lot of money in those days. This suggests that they may have been much closer than anyone has thought up until now. To put this into perspective, this would have been enough to buy 60 VWs at the official government price and still have enough money left over to give them all a fill-up. Of course, the government had difficulty producing the VWs at the official price, but that's a different story. And again, something you can see in a different video. Maybe Alois Hitler didn't need the money by now. He probably made enough from his notorious half-brother to secure a comfortable retirement. As the war came to an end, Alois Hitler got out of Berlin and made it back to Hamburg, where he'd previously lived. Like Berlin, it had been flattened by the war. Things, of course, were now completely different. At the beginning of October 1945, Alois Hitler wrote to the Drehbahn police station in Hamburg. He asked for permission to change his name. After all, who would now want the name A. Hitler on their door? He told officials that he was the half-brother of the former dictator, that he'd been in business in Hamburg from 1919 to 1928 and then ran a restaurant in Berlin. He told them that he'd never been in the Nazi Party or any other organization related to it. The officials in Hamburg were understanding, and the name change to Hitler went off without a hitch. So far, so good. But Hitler, like all Germans, had to face a denazification process in 1947. In the course of these proceedings, it emerged that he had been a member of the Nazi Party from 1926 to 1927. Alois Hitler now claimed that he did not mention that because, well, he'd just forgotten it had been such a long time ago and he hadn't really done anything in the Nazi Party anyway. And this was before they came to power. This was accepted by the Hamburg denazification authorities, and he was classified as category 5, that is to say, unencumbered. However, 2 years later, one Walter Herzog appeared on the scene. He lived in part of the former restaurant in Berlin and knew Alois Hitler from Nazi times. Herzog reported that the cafe had been significantly enlarged after the takeover by the then Alois Hitler, and concluded that this was only possible with support from higher places. Planning permission had been refused to the previous owner, so he concluded that Alois had pulled perhaps some strings. Herzog was also able to prove that Alois Hitler had several Jewish residents evicted in order to be able to enlarge his facility. The previous owner was Jewish and had had to sell the property to Hitler's half-brother at a knockdown price. At the time, everybody thought that Alois Hitler was a member of the Nazi Party, even if he wasn't. However, his son Heinrich, a favourite of his uncle, had attended a Nazi political education institution, which was something for the then establishment elite. His son died in a Soviet prison in 1942. However, Alois Hitler had also denounced the Gestapo 3 people, a French woman, a Czech, and another person of unknown origin, who probably all ended up in concentration camps. This led to a change in the original denazification classification from Category 5 to Category 3. Hitler was therefore considered to be a minor offender. Nonetheless, the Central Committee for denazification even had an understanding of sorts that Adolf wanted nothing to do with Alois. The decision stated, Adolf Hitler will certainly have been aware of the criminal past of his half-brother Alois Hitler. He therefore had to make sure that this man, who was related by blood, appeared as little as possible and limited himself to practicing his profession. Of course, they knew nothing of the 1938 will, which would have demonstrated something completely different. Alois Hitler appealed, probably because he wanted compensation for his Berlin cafe, which was not possible with the classification of minor offender. Nonetheless, he still had his savings from the time he ran his Berlin cafe. He continued his life in a middle-class environment with his family in Hamburg-Vilsbüttel. He was killed in a traffic accident on the 20th of May 1956 and was buried in the main cemetery in Earlsdorf. His second wife died in 1966. Bridget Dowling Hitler died in 1969 at the age of 78 and is buried in a small Catholic graveyard in Coram, New York. Patrick William Hitler was buried beside her in 1987. So I hope you found that of interest. I need to point out, of course, that because of the stories told by his first wife Bridget and their son, there's a lot of legends associated with Alois, some things of which may not be correct, but I've done my best to try and sort out the correct bits from the non-correct bits. But if there's anything you can actually say to which may be incorrect or to about this story, then please do put it in the comments section. Bearing in mind, of course, the stories told about this, him living in Liverpool, Hitler living in Liverpool, are complete nonsense. So we need better sources than, for example, the Daily Mail. Anyway, I hope you found that of interest, and that if you haven't already done so, you will subscribe. I upload at least one video per week, and if there's only one video in a week, that will be on a Friday at 8 in the evening, 2000 hours, that is Central European time. So if you live in Los Angeles, it's going to be in the afternoon. Thanks for watching.